You want me to confess? You're going to embarrass me in front of my officers? Harrow asked. Naya spoke without looking at him. You'll walk out of here like a man. What happens after that depends on whether you finally tell the truth. Harrow took a step toward her and roared, You're a federal bluff. Naya raised an eyebrow and responded, Try me. The last time she sat across from a cop in a café, it ended with her little brother in handcuffs for a crime he didn't commit. That memory never left her. Not the cuffs. Not the look in the officer's eyes. So when she walked into Eastwood's quiet café, carrying a federal badge and a file thick with sealed truths, she wasn't there for the coffee. And when Officer Huxley called her a menace, he didn't know. He was staring down at the woman sent to arrest his boss. This story only gets deeper from here. You need to stick around till the end, if you want to see how dangerous silence can be. Also kindly like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't, so you never miss when truth comes knocking again. What time are you watching this? Please comment your timestamp below, we will like to know. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Harlan's cafe, slanting across the hardwood floors in thick golden beams. The bell above the door rang gently, not sharp, just enough to make heads turn without concern. She walked in like she'd been there before, though no one could remember seeing her face. Her skin was the shade of polished walnut, her eyes quiet and sharp. A dark green wool coat fell to her knees, structured but worn in at the elbows, the kind of detail that only someone paying attention would notice. Naya Temple didn't come to Eastwood for the coffee. She came for closure. She slid into a corner booth without asking for a menu. Her hands were steady as she reached into her satchel and pulled out a manila folder. Not thick, but deliberate. The waitress, an older white woman with soft creases around her eyes, approached cautiously. Morning. Can I get you something? Naya looked up and offered a tired smile. Just coffee, black, no sugar. The woman nodded and shuffled off. To most, Naya might have looked like a traveling professor or someone waiting on a job interview. But the folder beside her told a different story. Witness statements, sealed records, internal memos typed in a font too old for casual eyes. Outside, a patrol car coasted to a stop. Officer Reed Huxley yawned behind the wheel, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. 33 years old, broad-shouldered, jaw too tight for comfort. He wasn't a bad cop. But he was the kind that did what he was told, especially when it came from the man upstairs. Reed's world was simple. Keep the peace. Control the variables. Know who doesn't belong. And the woman in the booth? She didn't belong. He noticed her through the window, alone, unfamiliar, watching the room like it might turn on her. His gut tightened. That was the training talking. Not the manual, but the unofficial one. The one passed down through glances, through warnings in locker rooms, through phrases like, always trust your instincts. Reed stepped inside. The bell rang again. Heads turned, this time more deliberately. Everyone knew Officer Huxley. He nodded to a few locals, scanned the room, and made a slow beeline toward the corner booth. Naya didn't flinch. She knew he was coming. You waiting on someone? He asked, polite but firm. She looked up, her voice soft. No. Just here for the coffee. He let the silence sit. Then gestured to the folder. That's a lot of reading material. It's an old habit, she replied. Better than scrolling a phone. Reed smiled thinly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mind if I ask what brings you to Eastwood? Just passing through, she said, but she didn't lie well on purpose. She wanted him to feel the edge. Reed shifted slightly. His hand hovered close to the radio on his shoulder. Not touching it. Not yet. Naya sipped her coffee. It was bitter, over-roasted. She didn't mind. You from around here? He asked. No. Got ID on you? She met his eyes. Is that a request or an order? I'm just doing my job, he said. People get nervous when someone they don't know is taking notes. I'm not taking notes, Naya said. She reached into her coat slowly. He tensed. Her fingers pulled out a slim leather case and set it on the table, unopened. Reed stared at it. Didn't touch it. You expecting trouble? He asked. No, she said. But I've learned not to be surprised by it. He leaned closer now. His voice lowered. What's in the folder? Paper, she replied. But if you're asking whether it concerns you, not yet. Something in her tone made him bristle. He took a step back, pressed the radio. This is Unit 5. I need another unit at Harlan's Café. Possible disturbance. Woman refusing to identify. The waitress peeked out from behind the counter. Conversations dropped around the cafe like glass. Naya didn't move. Didn't blink. She opened the folder just enough to reveal a single page, stamped with a federal seal. She didn't offer it. Just let him see. Reed's breath hitched. That real? Depends who's asking, she said. He stepped back. You could be impersonating. I've seen that before. People printing badges off the internet. Naya stood. Her voice didn't rise. And I've seen people lose their jobs confusing authority with suspicion. Another officer pushed through the door. A younger guy, less sure of himself. Reed gestured toward Naya. She won't say who she is. The second officer glanced between them. What's the crime? Reed didn't answer right away. Then, she's acting strange. Could be filming. Could be baiting us. Naya finally opened the leather wallet. Not flashing. Laying it flat. Federal Auditor. Department of Justice. And I'm here on classified assignment. She looked at Reed. Your boss is expecting me. He just doesn't know it yet. Reed stared at the badge. The silence after her words wasn't loud, it was surgical. Every ear in that cafe strained to hear, but no one dared to move. The folders still sat open. Names at the top. One of them was his. Time didn't slow inside Harlan's Café. It thickened. Like the quiet before a thunderstorm when the wind goes still and the birds stop singing. Conversations had faded to murmurs, then to silence, as Officer Huxley stood across from Naya Temple, trying to read a woman he'd already misjudged. She didn't look like power. She looked like patience. And that unsettled him more than anything. He glanced down at the leather badge case on the table again, open just enough to see the seal of the Department of Justice gleaming faintly under the morning light. Not a knockoff. Not a novelty. And the file next to it. He hadn't seen the contents, but he saw his own name printed at the top of one of the documents before she closed it slowly. That shook something in him. Something old. Something buried. Naya didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her stillness was its own kind of speech. Reed shifted on his feet, heat blooming in his chest, not just from embarrassment, but from confusion. He'd been trained to spot threats, to read unease in body language, to preempt danger. But what do you do when your instincts don't line up with the facts? The second officer, Carter, stood off to the side now, unsure whether to intervene or observe. He was younger, still new enough to carry a kind of hope in his eyes. But even he sensed it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was something larger. And it had just been set in motion. Naya took another sip of the bitter coffee. She didn't wince. I assume the chief isn't far? She asked quietly, not looking at Reed now, but at the window beyond him. He'll be here soon, Carter answered before Huxley could speak. Reed shot him a look. Carter glanced away. The cafe's manager came out from the kitchen, eyes darting between the officers and the woman in the booth. His voice was nervous, polite. Is everything all right here? Reed forced a smile. Just making sure we're all safe, Tim. Naya finally turned to look at the manager. Your staff's safe. Your patrons too. Her gaze lingered, kind but firm. But I'd suggest you clear the next 10 minutes on the floor plan. He didn't understand, but the tone made him nod anyway. Why assure? He muttered, retreating. Huxley exhaled through his nose. I don't know what this is, he said to her, voice low, but you came in here like you wanted attention. She tilted her head. No. I came in here to give your department a chance to handle this quietly. He looked down at the table, then back at her. You could have gone to the station. I've seen what happens when people like me walk into places uninvited, she said calmly. Too many rooms with locked doors. Too many accidents. Too many files that go missing. Reed opened his mouth, then closed it. She watched him, and for the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not challenge. Not smugness. Just weariness. You've been a cop long enough, she said. You know what happens to truth when it's left in the hands of people who've never been held accountable. Reed didn't answer. His thoughts churned, memories of things he'd ignored, stories he'd brushed off, complaints that never made it past the front desk. A car door slammed outside. Naya's eyes shifted slightly. "Your chief," she said, as if reading the air. A moment later, the door opened and Chief Mason Harrow entered. Tall, sun-wrinkled, with salt and pepper hair and a stride that said he was the law, no matter what patch he wore. He stopped when he saw her. And in that split-second hesitation, Naya saw recognition. Not from the past. From a memo. He knew who she was. "Mason Harrow," she said, rising. Her tone was soft, but it filled the room. "I have federal business with you." He didn't blink. "Miss, if there's something you need." She slid the sealed envelope across the table. "You're being served. An active federal investigation has tied your name to a series of cover-ups, including but not limited to falsified reports, misappropriated funds, and coercion of witnesses." Harrow's face didn't move. "I'd like to see identification," he said evenly. She handed it over this time. "Full badge. Full ID." He took a moment. Scanned it. Checked the date. The seal. The photo. Stillness. "You came into my town," he said, eyes never leaving hers, "and started pointing fingers without checking in with command?" "I checked in," she replied. "With the law." The next few seconds stretched too long. Reed stood frozen, unsure if he should step between them or step aside. But Naya wasn't waiting for anyone's permission. She reached into her satchel and placed a flash drive on the table next to the warrant. "Inside are audio logs from 3 internal informants. 2 of your patrol officers, and 1 civilian who lost his brother to a traffic stop that never got filed. I can play them for you if you like." Harrow's hand flexed near his belt. Not on his gun. Just instinct. Carter noticed. He stiffened. "You think you're going to embarrass me in front of my officers?" Harrow asked. Naya's voice didn't change. "I think you already did that yourself." Silence. Then Harrow laughed. Low and sharp. "You think any of it matters to people around here?" "I don't need it to matter to them," she said. "I need it to matter to the courts." He took a step forward. "And what if I say no?" From the corner, Reed finally spoke, quietly. "You should read what's in the envelope, sir." Harrow turned to him slowly, as if seeing him for the first time. "You're speaking out of line, officer." Reed hesitated. "Maybe. But if half of what's in that folder is true." He didn't finish. Naya watched the space between them, the subtle shift in gravity. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about whether the cracks inside this town's thin shell would hold, or finally collapse. She turned to Reed, her voice softer now. "You said earlier you were just doing your job. But the question is, what do you think that job really is?" Outside, the sun had shifted. It wasn't warmer, it was brighter. Almost too bright. The kind of light that made old paint on buildings peel faster and forced secrets out of hiding. Inside the café, no one spoke. The hum of the refrigeration unit in the back room had become the loudest sound. The manager hovered near the register, pretending to organize receipts. A few customers had slipped out quietly. A few stayed, too curious or too afraid to move. Chief Harrow hadn't touched the envelope on the table. His jaw worked behind clenched lips, eyes flicking from the badge to the flash drive to Naya Temple's face. Naya hadn't moved in several minutes. Still standing, spine straight, hands clasped in front of her like a courtroom witness waiting for the next question. Calm, composed, until you looked closer. There was something in her eyes. Something distant. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was memory. 17 years ago, she had sat in a different cafe, in a different town. She was 17. Her little brother, Devin, was 13 and fidgeting in his seat, stirring too much sugar into his milkshake. The officer had walked in like he owned the room. And 5 minutes later, Devin was face down on the floor, crying. The officer had accused him of stealing a phone. No proof. Just a gut feeling. The phone turned up under the table, left behind by another customer. No apology. No explanation. Just the same smug walk back to the patrol car. She'd never forgotten that moment. Not Devon's shaking hands. Not the way the cafe manager pretended not to see. Not the way everyone else just kept eating. Now, in Eastwood, that memory stood with her like a second spine. I'll say this once, Harrow growled, pulling Naya out of her past. You don't know this town. You don't know what we've had to deal with. No, she said quietly. But I know what you've buried to keep it looking clean. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, coiled. You think one badge makes you powerful? You think you're different from the ones who came before you. Naya didn't flinch. I'm not different. I'm prepared. Reed Huxley watched this unfold, standing to the side, heart pounding in the hollow behind his ribs. There had been rumors, always rumors, about how Harrow handled things, about complaints that never went anywhere, about a janitor who suddenly quit after being questioned late one night without paperwork. But you didn't question the chief. Not if you wanted to last. Still, something in Naya's words hung in the air like smoke. What do you think that job really is? She had asked him that question. And now it echoed in his mind louder than Harrow's threats. He looked at the subpoena again. Then the flash drive. Then the folders still sitting closed but heavy. Reed had seen sealed envelopes before. He'd helped serve them for eviction notices. Court summons. But never like this. Never against a man whose shadow stretched across the entire department. Harrow broke the silence. You've got a warrant. Fine. But if you think I'm walking out of here like a criminal, you're mistaken. Naya spoke without looking at him. You'll walk out of here like a man. What happens after that depends on whether you finally tell the truth. He scoffed. You want me to confess? In front of my officers? I want you to recognize that the badge you wear doesn't absolve you of consequence. He turned, looking at Reed now. You buying into this? Reed's mouth was dry. I don't know what I'm looking at, sir. You're looking at a federal bluff. Naya raised an eyebrow. Try me. Harrow took a step toward her. Do you have any idea how hard it is to run a department in a town like this? You have to make decisions people won't like. You have to keep order. You kept fear, she said. No, he snapped. I kept things from falling apart. By breaking the rules you swore to uphold. Harrow jabbed a finger at her. You don't get it. You come from a city office, looking for your big moment, and you think this place is just another headline waiting to happen. I didn't come for a headline, Naya said, her voice so low Reed had to lean forward to hear it. I came because someone's son never made it home from a routine stop. And no one ever got a straight answer. That silenced even Harrow. Reed blinked. Who? Naya turned to him. Julian Meeks. 22 years old. Last seen leaving work. He was pulled over 2 blocks from his apartment. Dash cam footage went missing. Reports said he ran. But no one found his footprints in the snow. Reed remembered. Vaguely. The case had vanished almost overnight. You think the chief, he started. I don't think, Naya interrupted. I know. Carter stepped closer now, his face pale. That's why you're really here. Yes, Naya said. And because you both deserve to know what you were asked to protect. She finally opened the folder fully and pushed it toward them. Inside, copies of redacted reports. Statements from former officers. Internal emails. Body cam logs with time gaps. Expense reports with untraceable reimbursements. A death certificate signed off too quickly. Reed's fingers hovered over the pages, trembling slightly. This can't all be real, he whispered. Naya's voice softened. It is. And I didn't come here to punish everyone. I came to stop the pattern. Harrow stood frozen now, his mouth a tight line. But he didn't argue. He didn't reach for the folder. He just stood there, unraveling. Naya stepped away from the booth. You'll be taken in for questioning. I won't cuff you, not unless you resist. But if you walk out with dignity, your officers will at least remember that part of you. Reed turned to the chief, waiting. Harrow didn't move. Then, slowly he nodded once. I want my lawyer, he muttered. You'll get one, Naya said. Carter stepped forward. I'll drive him. Naya gave a quiet nod. Thank you. Reed stayed behind. The cafe was almost empty now. He sat down in the booth where she had been. The folder was still open in front of him. The air felt heavy. And something else lingered. A choice. The café emptied one cautious breath at a time. Chairs scraped gently. Boots whispered against old hardwood. The air was thick, the kind that sticks to your throat after something important has been said, and no one wants to be the first to speak after. Reed sat alone at the booth, the folder still open in front of him. Pages that once meant nothing, just ink and dates, now felt heavier than the pistol on his hip. He stared at the grainy printout of Julian Meek's arrest report. Routine stop, suspect fled, no pursuit recorded. Officer involved, Harrow, body cam footage. Technical issue. The same technical issue that had haunted half a dozen other names in the folder. He rubbed his face, hands rough against skin that hadn't shaved in a day. A storm was moving inside his chest now, old and new memories colliding like trucks in a fog. It wasn't the first time something hadn't sat right. There was that call 2 winters ago, black SUV parked near the elementary school. He was dispatched. Found a teenage boy inside, reading a book, waiting for his sister. Too close to school property, Harrow had said later. Could have been casing. Reed had nodded then. Not because he believed it, but because it was easier. He told himself it wasn't personal. It was just protocol. But now, looking at Julian's name again, Reed could feel that moment crawling back under his skin like a rash. Something ignored for too long. The door opened quietly. Not with drama. Not with authority. Just enough to break the tension. Nia Temple stepped back in. She wasn't holding the folder now. Just her coat, folded neatly in one arm. Her badge was gone from view. She didn't look like a federal investigator. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something for too long. Reed looked up but didn't speak. She sat across from him, silently, as if the table between them was something sacred, like a confessional neither of them fully trusted. For a while, neither said a word. Then she asked, "What do you see when you look at all this?" Reed glanced at the pages. "A mess," he said. Nia nodded, but not in agreement. In understanding. It always looks like a mess when you're close to it. But what you're really seeing is a pattern. He leaned back, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "Why didn't you come in guns blazing? Why sit here, order coffee and wait?" "Because storms don't start with thunder," she replied. "They start with pressure." Reed looked at her, eyes shadowed with something unsure. "You were hoping someone here would crack before the cuffs came out." "No," she said. "I was hoping someone would listen." That word, listen. It hit him harder than the subpoena had. He wasn't used to listening. He was used to being told. Follow the badge. Back the blue. Trust the chain of command. But none of those rules protected the people in that folder. "I didn't know," Reed said. The words felt brittle. "I didn't know it was this bad." Nia didn't offer comfort. She offered truth. "You didn't want to know. That's how they get away with it." His jaw tightened. "I'm not like him." She met his eyes. "Then prove it." A waitress dropped off a fresh pot of coffee on the table, sensing the gravity, saying nothing. Reed poured himself a cup. The shaking in his hand betrayed him. "I signed off on 3 of those reports," he said. "Didn't even read them. Just routine clearance." "Routine is how rot grows," Nia replied gently. He set the cup down. "What happens now?" She opened her notebook, not the manila folder, not her badge, just a worn leather-bound journal, pages lined with names, thoughts, timelines. "There's more," she said. "What you saw in that folder. That's enough to start pressure. But not enough to bring it all down." Reed looked up. "So you're staying?" "No. I'm done here," she said. He blinked. "But you said..." "I planted the seed. It's up to someone inside to water it." He understood then. She wasn't here to fix Eastwood. She was here to break the silence just enough that it couldn't be ignored. "What if no one does anything?" he asked. "Then nothing changes," she said. "And another Julian dies." She rose, slowly, gathering her coat. "You could help," she said quietly. "But only if you're ready to see things that won't let you sleep at night." Reed stood too, instinctively. "Tell me what to do." Nia paused. "I won't," she said. But I'll tell you this, if you stay quiet now, you'll hear their voices anyway. At every stop, every shift. You'll see them in your mirror when you're driving home. Outside, the street had cooled. Shadows stretched longer. The light had shifted from gold to gray. Naya stepped out, but Reed didn't follow right away. He stood in the cafe doorway, watching her walk away with nothing but her notebook and the weight she'd carried alone. She didn't look back. But she didn't need to. She'd done what she came to do. Back inside, Reed picked up the folder. Not just Julian's report now, but the whole thing. Dozens of names. Dozens of lives caught in the cracks. He sat down again. The coffee had gone cold. He took a deep breath. Then opened a new page in his own notebook, one he hadn't used since academy. At the top, he wrote, "What the badge doesn't cover." Below it, he began writing names. Not of criminals. Not of suspects. Of victims. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a cop. He felt like a man with something to make right. The first name didn't hit him. Neither did the second. But the third did. It struck like cold air in the lungs. Sudden, sharp, and unwelcome. Martin Coon. Reed stared at the name on the third page of Naya's folder, written in clean print at the top of an internal misconduct memo. The page was a summary report. Not formal, not filed, just typed testimony with footnotes and a list of incidents. One of the listed witnesses had their name redacted. But the officer accused? That was Martin. Reed sat back, spine stiffening as though someone had pulled a wire straight through his core. Martin Coon. Patrol officer. Shift partner. Groomsman at his wedding. Godfather to his firstborn. There were few people in the department Reed had trusted more than Martin. Fewer still he had defended so quickly. And now he was staring at words that felt like betrayal. Verbal intimidation of civilian during traffic stop. Threat of detainment used as coercion tactic. Confiscation of phone without legal cause. He rubbed his face hard, trying to erase what was in front of him. For months ago. They'd been riding together, late evening. Reed remembered it well because they had argued about music. Martin wanted to keep the scanner low so he could listen to a college football recap podcast. Reed was just trying to stay awake. They saw a kid walking along Crossline Avenue. Hoodie up. Backpack slung low. No streetlights there. No sidewalk. Martin had pulled over. Reed hadn't asked why. He'd sat in the car, sipping coffee while Martin stepped out. Watched from the mirror as Martin flashed his light at the kid and started asking questions. Where are you coming from? Why are you out this late? Open your bag. Give me your phone. Reed remembered how long it took. 10 minutes. Maybe 12. Martin came back holding a black iPhone and a slight smirk. Kid was filming. Said he didn't feel safe. Little bastard. Reed had laughed nervously then, not knowing what to say. Not wanting to rock the boat. The kid was let go, no citation, no file, no mention the next day. Reed never saw the phone again. Now, in the half-light of the cafe, that moment took on a different shape. It wasn't routine. It was intimidation. And Reed had sat in the car, eyes on the rearview, letting it happen. The folder shook in his hands. Not from fear. From weight. This wasn't about bad apples. That was a lie they told each other to sleep better. This was about a culture. One that traded accountability for loyalty. One that taught men like Martin and Reed to measure suspicion by skin color and to protect each other before the truth. He flipped the page. Another incident. Same officer. Different victim. Same method. Each one chipped at the man Reed thought he was. Footsteps approached the table. Reed didn't look up right away. When he did, it was Officer Carter, young, eyes still wide, like the world hadn't decided what to do with him yet. You okay? Carter asked hesitantly. No, Reed said. But I think that's a good thing. Carter nodded, unsure how to respond. Reed turned the folder toward him. Did you know? Carter leaned in, read for a few seconds, then swallowed hard. Martin? Yeah. Carter lowered himself into the booth slowly, like sitting with that truth hurt. I thought he was solid, Carter murmured. Always had your back. Trained the rookies. Helped out with the neighborhood barbecue last summer. Reed's voice cracked slightly. And maybe scared the hell out of a few kids on their way home from school. They sat in silence. Then Reed asked, "You ever see him go too far?" Carter paused. "Too long. There was a time last fall. I didn't think much of it then." "Tell me." "Couple of teenagers outside the corner mart," Carter said. "They were just hanging out, laughing, throwing a ball around. Martin said it was loitering. Pulled up hard. Made them line up against the wall. No report filed. I figured he was just making a point." Reed stared down at the folder. "He made a point all right." Carter's voice lowered. "What are you gonna do?" "I don't know yet." But he did. Later that evening, Reed drove home, windows down, trying to air out the day. The streets of Eastwood were too quiet, as if the town itself knew what had been shaken loose. His porch light was on when he pulled up. His daughter's bike lay half-toppled in the yard. Inside, the sound of cartoons drifted from the living room. But Reed didn't go inside. He sat on the steps. The air was cooling, the sky going soft with dusk. He pulled out his phone, opened a text thread with Martin Coon. Last message, "Yo, lunch tomorrow? Department grill out. Bring Maya." That was 2 days ago. Reed started typing. Then stopped. Then started again. He erased everything. Opened his notes app instead. And he began writing again, just like in the café. A new list. Title, "People I Owe the Truth." Julian Meeks. The kid with the phone. Those boys outside the corner mart. Carter himself. He stared at the list. Then added one more name. Martin Coon. Because telling the truth sometimes meant telling it to the people you cared about, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. The next morning in Eastwood felt like the quiet after a fire. Nothing looked different from the outside. Mail still arrived. Children still waited by fences for school buses that groaned and stopped at every corner. Shops opened on time. Radios played. But there was a tension in the air, something unsaid that moved through the town like smoke, thick, invisible, and choking if you stayed still long enough to feel it. Reed Huxley sat in his cruiser outside the department parking lot with the engine off and the windows halfway down. His uniform was clean, his badge polished, but he felt like a man dressing up for a role he didn't believe in anymore. The seat beneath him was familiar, molded to his frame after years of shifts, but today it felt foreign, like he didn't belong in the space he once moved through without thinking. He could see Martin's truck already parked near the back entrance, parked the way Martin always parked. Nose out, engine still warm, like he never fully turned it off. Reed stared at the entrance for a long time before stepping out. The hallway leading toward the squad room was filled with the usual sounds. Someone laughing near the break room, boots tapping over tile, the low hum of dispatch radios, but it all seemed a layer too loud, like the town was trying to drown out what was shifting beneath the surface. Martin was sitting at his desk when Reed entered, leaning back in his chair with one boot propped on the edge of a filing cabinet and a mug balanced loosely in his hand. He looked up with that same easy grin Reed had seen for over a decade, the kind that could defuse a tense traffic stop or calm a rookie's nerves before their first solo shift. "There he is," Martin said, nodding. "You dodged me yesterday, or just enjoying the circus in your own corner?" Reed closed the door behind him. He didn't return the smile. Martin's brow furrowed just slightly, enough to notice. "You hear about the chief?" Martin asked. "Heard he got dragged in by some fed in a cafe. No warning. No heads up. Wild." Reed crossed the room slowly and sat across from him, hands folded, voice low but steady. "It wasn't wild," he said. "It was deliberate. And she didn't drag him. He walked." Martin's smile didn't fade entirely, but it stalled. "You all right, man?" Reed looked at the mug in Martin's hand, then back at his eyes. "What happened to the phone?" Martin blinked. "What?" "The kid you stopped on Crossline. Last winter. Dark hoodie. Backpack. You took his phone." Martin's jaw tensed just slightly. "Jesus, Reed. You going back that far?" "I'm not going back," Reed said. "I'm catching up." Martin set the mug down gently. "I told you about that night. Kid was filming. Acting like I was the problem. I took it, checked it, handed it back." "You didn't hand it back." Martin's eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped an octave. "You trying to accuse me of something?" I'm asking, Reed said, because someone else already did. There was a beat of silence between them. A moment where both men stopped being officers and became something else. Just two men in a room where the truth no longer had room to hide. Who's been talking? Martin asked, voice cooler now. Does it matter? It does if they're painting me like a racist because I did my damn job. Reed shook his head slowly. It wasn't just that kid. Martin laughed, sharp, defensive, hollow. You've been reading reports. I've been reading testimonies, Reed corrected. Martin stood now, pacing behind the desk like the walls had gotten smaller in the last few minutes. So what, now you're with internal affairs? You siding with that Fed who rolled in and started flipping over every rock? She didn't flip anything, Reed said. She just looked. Martin ran a hand down his face. You know what this town is, Reed. You know what we have to do to keep it together. You think intimidation is keeping it together? I think order matters more than comfort. Reed stood too, the tension between them drawing taut like a wire stretched to its limit. Comfort, he repeated. You made a teenager delete a video he had every right to record. You lined up boys outside a convenience store like they were criminals. You let Harrow tell you who deserved to be afraid and who didn't. Martin's voice rose now. You were there. You never said anything then. I know. The confession slipped out of Reed like breath he'd been holding for years. I didn't say anything. And that makes me part of it. Martin stared at him, the anger in his eyes slowly replaced by something else, something harder to name. You're going to report me. It wasn't a question. Reed didn't answer right away. I don't want to destroy your life, Martin, he said quietly. I want to stop the cycle. Someone has to. Martin laughed again, bitter this time. And you think that someone's you? No, Reed said. I think it should have been all of us years ago. Martin turned away, gripping the back of his chair like he needed to hold something or fall. You think people care? You think some file full of stories is going to change anything? They'll bury this, same way they buried the others. Reed stepped forward. Not if someone from the inside speaks. There was a pause. A heavy one. Martin turned back, his voice quieter now, worn at the edges. You think they'll believe you? Reed met his eyes. They have to, because if they don't, then I'm still wearing a badge that means nothing. Martin didn't respond. Not right away. But something shifted in his face, not surrender, but fatigue. The fatigue of a man who'd carried lies long enough that the weight had begun to show. Get out of my office, Reed. Reed hesitated, then stepped back. You'll be asked to give a statement soon. Martin nodded once, his jaw clenched like a dam holding back something bigger than either of them. I'll think about it. Reed opened the door and paused before walking out. When you do, he said softly, think about the ones who never got to tell their side of the story. And then he walked away. It was just after 10 a.m. when she walked in. No sirens. No crying. No raised voice. Just the low chime of the front entrance of the Eastwood Police Department and the soft shuffle of worn heels on linoleum floors. Reed was at the reception counter, signing a daily vehicle log when he noticed her. She wasn't familiar, not a local face, not one of the regulars who came in to report noise complaints or ask about parking rules. She stood with quiet poise, her purse cradled tightly beneath one elbow, a sealed envelope in her hand, and the look of someone who had come not to ask, but to be heard. The receptionist glanced up from behind the plexiglass and offered a polite, measured smile. Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you? The woman nodded. I need to speak with someone. About a report that was never followed up. Her voice didn't shake, but it held something deeper, controlled grief wrapped in civility. Reed stepped forward before the receptionist could respond. I can help, he said gently. I'm Officer Huxley. What's the report regarding? She turned to face him fully, eyes sharp and calm. There were lines on her face, some carved by time, others by things that had happened too early and never fully healed. Her braids were tucked into a neat bun, and the collar of her blouse was fastened by a pin shaped like a dove. She handed him the envelope. It's about my son. His name was Tariq Morris. The name hit like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the memory Reed didn't realize he still had. He took the envelope carefully, led her to one of the benches near the front desk, and sat beside her. The hallway behind him was quiet. Carter passed by once and gave a small nod, sensing the weight in the room. Reed opened the envelope and removed the contents. A photocopy of an incident form, a handwritten statement dated 2 years ago, and a faded photograph of a boy standing in front of a birthday cake. 15 candles, a wide grin, and eyes that hadn't yet learned how to lower themselves in the presence of authority. Reed looked at the date on the report. It was submitted in June of that year. The summer had been long and sweltering, he remembered. Long shifts. A few small drug busts. The usual tensions flaring up like flash paper and then disappearing just as fast. I submitted that report myself, she said softly. I waited at the front desk for 45 minutes. They told me someone would call. No one did. Reed flipped the paper over. There was no follow-up signature. No case number. Just a departmental intake stamp. The kind used when forms were received, but not necessarily processed. What happened? He asked. My son was walking home from his cousin's house, she said. Cut through the basketball court behind that middle school. It was almost dark. He had a hoodie on. Someone called it in. Said there was a prowler. An officer stopped him. Told him to sit down on the pavement. Asked what he had in his backpack. Tariq asked if he was being detained. The officer told him to shut his mouth and stop acting smart. Then he slammed him to the ground. Her voice didn't rise. She spoke like someone who had told this story too many times. He had bruises on his ribs. A cut on his cheek. They took him in for questioning, but no charges were filed. No report was made. When I came to pick him up, they handed him over like nothing happened. Reed looked up from the paper, his throat dry. Do you remember which officer it was? She nodded once. He wore glasses. Mid-40s. Southern accent. My son said he kept calling him boy. Reed's stomach twisted. He knew exactly who that was. Officer Dalton Kress. Kress had transferred out of Eastwood 6 months later. No one talked about why. I kept this, the woman said, gesturing toward the envelope. I waited for someone to call. I thought maybe I filed it wrong. Maybe I missed something. But then 2 months ago I heard about Julian Meeks. I recognized the name. Reed leaned forward slightly. How did you recognize it? My sister works in the county office. She overheard someone talking. She sent me the article. Said a federal investigator was in town, digging into old files. So you came here, Reed said. She met his eyes. I came to see if Eastwood was finally ready to listen. Reed folded the papers and placed them gently back in the envelope. I'm sorry, he said. There's no excuse for what happened to your son. She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She just asked, what are you going to do about it? The question didn't come with anger. It came with expectation. And it was worse than a demand. It was an invitation. An invitation to stop hiding behind protocols. To stop treating the past like a pile of mistakes no one wanted to sort through. To stop saying, sorry, as if that changed anything. I'll reopen it, Reed said quietly. I'll attach it to the investigation that's already in motion. Your son's name will be in the file this time. She stood slowly, smoothed the front of her skirt, and held his gaze for one long moment. That's a start, she said. Reed nodded. It won't be the end. Before she walked out, she paused at the door and looked back. Tariq's in college now. Studying criminal justice. The words caught him off guard. He is. She nodded. He said if the system was going to hurt people like him, the least he could do was understand it better. Reed felt the floor tilt beneath him, not from shock, but from shame. This boy, this kid they had treated like a threat, had chosen to understand the machine rather than burn it down. He didn't know whether that made him brave or tragic. Maybe both. The woman left, and the door clicked softly behind her. Reed stood in the quiet lobby, holding the envelope against his chest. He looked down at the birthday photo again, now smudged faintly at the edges from the press of fingers and time. There was a time when Reed Huxley knew every inch of the Eastwood precinct by heart. Every creak in the floorboards. Every corner where the tile had chipped from years of boots dragging across it. Every broken vending machine light that flickered faintly no matter how many times the maintenance guy replaced the bulb. But that morning, as he walked down the narrow hallway toward the old equipment lockers, the building felt unfamiliar. Like it was finally showing its age and its secrets. The locker room sat at the far end of the hallway, a long space of faded steel doors, half-rusted hinges, and the sharp scent of bleach that never quite faded. Each locker bore a tag, names etched in fading black marker or taped labels curling at the edges. It was a place where most things were forgotten unless they were too heavy to carry home. Reed stood still for a moment before stepping inside. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan above. He counted rows in his head, his boots moving automatically until he stopped in front of locker 41. Dalton Cress's name was still taped to the front, faded but legible. The lock had been removed long ago, probably after his transfer, but no one had claimed what was inside. That wasn't unusual. Some officers left behind gear they didn't care about. Uniforms that no longer fit, spare handcuffs, empty notebooks. But something about this locker made Reed pause. It wasn't just what Cress had done. It was how quickly he had disappeared. 6 months after the incident with Tariq Morris, Cress had put in a request to transfer to a neighboring county. No ceremony. No farewell drinks at the bar. Just a Monday morning where his desk sat empty and the nameplate was gone by noon. At the time, Reed hadn't thought much of it. He assumed there'd been a family issue, a relocation, maybe a quiet reprimand. Now, with what he knew about Harrow's quiet cleanups, he suspected something else entirely. Reed opened the locker door slowly. Inside, a uniform hung on the hook, still pressed, but dust gathering on the shoulders. A half-empty box of latex gloves sat on the shelf, yellowed with age. And at the bottom, beneath a pair of cracked duty boots, sat a locked gray file box. Reed reached down and pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked. There was no label. No initials. Just a scratched surface and a small keyhole. He set it on the bench and stared at it for a long while. The department didn't keep spare keys for personal file boxes. Officers were expected to take them when they left or clear them out before reassignment. This box had no business being here. And the longer it stayed unopened, the louder the questions became. Reed didn't force it open. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in years. He looked up Cress's old locker partner. Sergeant Marlene Vega had retired 2 years ago. She now lived on the edge of town, in a small brick house with an overgrown front garden and a wind chime that never stopped moving, even when there was no wind. Reed pulled up just after noon. Vega answered the door herself, dressed in a faded denim jacket and a pair of gardening gloves. She squinted when she saw him, then smiled softly. "Well now, this is a face I didn't expect," she said. "Thought you all forgot about me." Reed offered a tired smile. "Never." She stepped aside and waved him in. The living room smelled like mint tea and old newspaper. Framed certificates hung beside a single black and white photo, her swearing-in ceremony, years ago, younger and proud. They sat near the fireplace, sunlight cutting through the blinds in strips across the carpet. Reed didn't waste time. "I need to ask you about Dalton Cress." Vega's smile faded. "I was afraid you'd say that." Reed nodded slowly. "You were his locker partner." "For 3 years," she said. "Long enough to see things I should have reported. But back then, you stayed quiet." She looked away. "I told myself it was because I didn't have proof. But really, I didn't want to be the one who tore the thin trust we had left." Reed reached into his bag and set the file box on the coffee table. This was at the bottom of his locker. "I think he left it behind on purpose." Vega looked at the box for a long moment. Then she rose and walked to the hall closet, returning with a small tin container. Inside, nestled among loose buttons and keys to long-forgotten drawers, was a silver key with a red thread tied through the loop. "I used to water the station plants," she said softly. "Sometimes I'd stay late, help clean up. Cress left this key on his desk one night. I kept it. Don't know why." Reed took the key, heart pounding. He fitted into the box. It clicked open. Inside were layers of paper, old notebooks, scribbled traffic logs, half-torn tickets. But beneath them, tucked carefully in a yellow envelope, were 3 folded pages. Each was a printed report that had never been filed. And one of them carried a name Reed hadn't seen in years. Jeremiah Pollard. 17. Minor offense. Failure to disperse. Date. 5 years ago. The name dropped into Reed's memory like a stone in a pond. Jeremiah had been one of the kids they'd picked up during a street incident outside the old theater. There had been loud music, teens hanging out. Nothing serious. But Cress had insisted on clearing the scene. Reed had filled out half the paperwork before Harrow told him to toss it. Don't give these kids records over noise, Harrow had said. Handle it off the books. Reed had obeyed. He told himself he was doing them a favor. Now he saw the truth. The report in the box listed unnecessary force. It had been written by Cress, but never submitted. It described his own behavior in the third person. It was almost a confession. Vega read it over his shoulder, then sank into the couch. My God, she whispered. He wanted someone to find this. Reed carefully folded the report and placed it back in the envelope. Then we make sure someone does. The train station wasn't busy. It never was. In Eastwood, trains came and went like ghosts, quiet, unnoticed, often empty. The kind of transportation that served people passing through, not staying. But Reed knew she'd still be there. Naya had said she was done, that her work was finished. But something about the way she lingered in the café, how she watched him write that list, told him otherwise. She was waiting for the town to choose. And Reed had chosen. He parked near the edge of the gravel lot, engine off, wind slicing across the dashboard as the clouds gathered overhead like storm-bent curtains. The station platform was little more than a bench under a canopy, bordered by rusted rail fencing and a faded vending machine humming with stale energy. Naya sat alone, her coat draped over her knees, her bag resting beside her. She was reading from a pocket-sized book, thumb tucked softly against the spine. Reed approached slowly. Not out of caution, but out of respect. Something about her silence demanded it. She looked up as he neared, not startled, just expectant. You didn't leave, he said. Not yet, she replied. Trains are on their own time out here. He sat beside her, placing the metal file box on the bench between them. The sound of it echoed slightly against the wood slats beneath them. What's that? She asked, already knowing. Dalton Cress's box. I found it in the locker room. Her fingers brushed against the lid but didn't open it. You read it? She asked. Yes. And? There's a report on Jeremiah Pollard, he said. 5 years old. Cress wrote it but never filed it. He describes his own use of force. Objectively. Like he was documenting someone else. Naya turned her face toward him, her expression unreadable. That sounds like guilt. Reed nodded. It also sounds like regret. For a moment, the wind passed through them, dragging dry leaves across the tracks like whispers trying to form words. I don't think he meant to disappear, Reed said. I think he wanted someone to come looking. Naya finally opened the box. Her hands moved carefully, like someone handling an artifact from another time, fragile and dangerous. She read quickly but thoroughly, flipping through each page as if tracing the rhythm of a confession left too long in silence. When she reached the last report, she paused. Then looked up. Do you know what this is, Officer Huxley? He shook his head, uncertain what she meant. This is the crack, she said softly. Not the collapse. Not the explosion. Just the first crack. The one that tells you the dam isn't as strong as everyone thought. Reed looked down at the box again. Is it enough? She folded the papers gently and returned them to the envelope. No. But it's more than we had yesterday. And it's something I can take back with me, something they can't pretend not to see. Reed leaned back, hands in his lap, eyes on the tracks that stretched out like threads toward nowhere. You said you were leaving. I am, she said. My job isn't to finish the story. Just to make sure it can't be buried anymore. But what about what's left here? He asked. What about everyone still pretending nothing's changed? Naya turned to him again, and for the first time, her voice carried something more than calm. It carried a quiet urgency. That's why I came back. Not for Harrow. Not for the folder. For you. Reed blinked. Me. You're the one who has to stay, she said. You're the one who has to look those names in the eye and decide whether they belong in a file drawer or in a courtroom. He exhaled slowly. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You don't need to be strong, she said. You just need to be honest. There was a long silence between them. Then Reed opened his notebook. The one he'd been carrying since the café. The one filled with names and questions and memories that refused to fade. I've started collecting every incomplete report I can find, he said. Every complaint that was never investigated. I'm piecing it together. Timeline, location, officer involved. I don't know if anyone will listen, but... They will, Naya interrupted. Eventually. The thing about truth is it doesn't die. It just waits. She stood then, slipping the file box into her bag with slow precision. Her shoulders straightened beneath the weight. The DOJ will contact you, she said. There will be hearings. Maybe internal audits. Maybe worse. Reed stood too. I'll be ready. Naya nodded once. You're becoming who this department needed 10 years ago. He smiled faintly. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. So does every decent man who's been part of something broken, she said. The train whistle sounded in the distance. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of finality. As the platform began to hum with the approach, Naya turned and faced him one last time. There's one more file in that box, she said quietly. At the bottom. It's sealed. Reed looked at her. What's in it? She met his eyes. Someone you didn't expect. Then she boarded the train. Reed sat back down on the bench after it pulled away, the cold creeping into his collar, into his bones. He opened the box once more, fingers pushing aside the top layers until he reached it, a single manila envelope marked with a red X in one corner. He slid it out, flipped it open. Inside was a personnel file. Photograph. Evaluation. Performance reports. Name, Officer Reed Huxley. He didn't move. There was a copy of a complaint tucked behind his last commendation, filed 6 years ago by a woman whose name he barely remembered. Her son had been stopped walking home from band practice. Reed had done nothing to him, but he'd stood beside the officer who did. He had never spoken up. He had signed the report without reading it. And now it was here. In the box. In the breach. A final reminder that the cracks weren't just around him. They ran straight through him. The sound of the train was gone. It had pulled into the distance like the closing line of a hard conversation. Quiet, irreversible, and final. Reed sat on the platform long after it disappeared from view. The personnel file still sat open on his lap, the papers caught slightly by the breeze that pushed around him but couldn't move through him. His chest felt heavy. Not with fear, but with the kind of weight that only comes when you realize the story you've been telling yourself is no longer true. He had once believed he wore the badge to protect people. That the uniform made him a safeguard against chaos. But now, as the setting sun slid behind the tall trees surrounding Eastwood, he understood something deeper. Justice isn't found in the badge. It's found in what you do when no one else is watching. He closed the file carefully, pressed it to his chest, and walked back to his car. The next morning, Reed walked into the department before sunrise. The building was quiet, the kind of stillness that came before phones started ringing, before boots stomped across the lobby, before the coffee machine hissed to life in the break room. He walked past Carter in the hallway. The younger officer gave him a look, not one of suspicion, but of expectation. Reed gave a small nod. They both understood now. Silence could no longer be their currency. Reed headed straight for internal affairs. The door was closed, blinds still drawn. The officer in charge wasn't in yet. Reed didn't need him to be. He left the file, his file, with a handwritten note on top. I failed to act. This is my account. I am willing to testify to everything in this report and anything else you find. The handwriting was steady, but the signature at the bottom shook as it hit the page. He wasn't protecting himself anymore. He was protecting the truth. Over the next few weeks, Eastwood changed. Not in loud, sweeping ways. There were no protests. No banners. No viral moments to rally behind. Just movement. Quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. Several sealed complaints were reopened. New policies were written. Officers were reassigned. Some resigned. And in a meeting room with harsh lights and low ceilings, Reed Huxley sat across from a panel of state investigators. He answered their questions. All of them. Not to save face, not to avoid consequences, but because silence had cost others far more than it had ever cost him. He talked about Harrow's buried reports. He talked about Cress's incident. He talked about the night Julian Meeks never made it home. And then, though his voice cracked, he talked about the boy with the phone, the one Martin took into custody, the one he never defended. I didn't stop him, Reed said. I was there. I didn't say a word. And that's why I'm here now, because someone finally has to. One of the investigators asked him why he chose to come forward now. Reed's reply was simple. Because I want to wear the badge without it hiding who I used to be. 2 months later, the Department of Justice concluded its review. Chief Mason Harrow was indicted. Martin Coon was suspended pending further investigation. Several families, including the mother of Tariq Morris and the sister of Julian Meeks, received formal apologies from the department and were invited to testify in future oversight hearings. Not as grieving voices begging to be heard, but as witnesses who had waited long enough. And Reed? He remained. Not as a man untouched by the storm, but as one who had chosen to stand in its center. He didn't run from the stain on his record. He didn't try to explain it away. Instead, he started leading the department's internal review process, not with fear, but with honesty. He sat with rookies during their onboarding, told them what he did wrong, showed them the reports, named the people the town once chose to forget. He kept Naya's notebook on his desk, still worn, still open. The list of names was longer now. But beside each name, there was something new, a line of action taken, a file reopened, a person reached out to. Justice wasn't clean. It wasn't fast. But in Eastwood, it had started to grow. Rooted not in vengeance. Rooted in truth. On a cold spring morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a simple envelope. Reed opened it at his desk. Inside was a single line handwritten on an index card. You didn't need backup to speak up. You just needed to decide who you were without the badge. At the bottom, small and faint, Naya Temple. He placed the card inside the front flap of her notebook, closed it gently, then stood and walked toward a conference room where 5 young officers waited for him, ready to be trained. Not just in tactics, but in truth. Some stories end with justice in a courtroom. Others end quietly, in a man's decision to finally face himself, and in a town's choice to stop looking away. Eastwood is just a story. But maybe you know a place like it. Maybe you've lived in it. Maybe you've worked in it. Maybe you've stayed silent in it. If this story resonates with you, if it made you think, share it. If it made you feel something like it, and if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, not for shock, but for truth, subscribe and turn on the bell. Let's keep asking the hard questions. Because silence protects no one. Not forever.